Hello everybody watching from the comfort of their homes. We're just getting ourselves set up, so you will hear hubbub in the background. So fingers crossed that that is fine, and I will unmute you again when we're all ready to go. Just so you're aware, this is the situation filling up in Waterstones in Glasgow, Stocking Hall Street, to give you a sense of where you are away from where you are. Testing for wider audio, and hopefully also we'll get pick up on something else. This is how you hybrid on a shoestring. Fingers crossed everything's working.
Okay, there. Yeah, I've got one who's going to be in the show tonight, and she's asked me if I could keep her for her. She's paid for the ticket with the book. Yeah, that works. Yeah, it looks exactly the big
And then after you safety briefing, sorry, let's try it away.
Right. We're not starting yet. I'm just asking if you're all right. Can everyone hear? Oh, that's better. See, mine was switched off again.
Mine was. Is this loud enough? Is this fine? Okay. Okay.
Right.
It's an additional projection here. It's a bit weird. I'm gonna step away from the bad jokes if possible. Thank you. I know. I work my branding into everything. Yeah. Okay, we're just going to get, for those of us at home, we're going to get the Waterstones safety briefing for everybody here so we know how to evacuate.
Good evening to everyone joining us in store and online. We're delighted to have you all with us in one form or another. Unfortunately, I do get the very boring job tonight. In the event of a fire, you will know it is a fire because the fire alarm is loud, which is annoying, and it tells you it's a fire alarm. It's great. If that happens, please go to the stairs that you came in via, follow those down. My colleague will let you out at the front of the building. Please assemble on the street on the other side of the road, just so we can make sure you're all safely out of the building. If we can't find you there, we'll assume you're still in here, and then we'll tell the fire brigade that. No one enjoys that. If you cannot use the stairs safely in the event of the fire, please come and find myself. I will be up here and I will escort you to a place of safety until we can be evacuated. Okay? If you need to use the toilets at any time during this event, they're on the opposite side of this floor. You walk past them as you came up the stairs. At the end of the event, Neil will be signing books. We will be providing a pen for him to do so. We may have to change. We may have to chain him to the table. If you have already bought your book, that's fine. Just take it up to him. If you have not yet purchased a book, we do have a limited number left. Get it from the table, get it signed, and then come find me at the cafe till to pay for it. Don't forget the paying part. We really don't like it when that happens. This makes everyone sad, especially Neil. You don't get paid if it's stolen. We will also have some wine and some soft drinks at the end of the night as well as now. So please come and collect those at the end of the night as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Meg and Neil.
It's really fun to be doing one of these live again with actual humans in the room, although when I disastrously spill the wine or something, everybody will see.
Everyone on the internet as well.
Everyone in the internet will see, but they might not hear, which is partly why that's just been moved closer and if at any point. So we're super happy to have you here today. I will tell you right now, I loved the book, as you can see from all the green bits are the bits where I'm just like, I love this bit of writing. The orange bits are, oh, I have thoughts. So, but obviously we'll be quite good about this. So, my name is Meg McDonald. I'm a division head for promotions in Glasgow in 2024, which is the World Science Fiction Convention bit that we're hoping to have in Glasgow in 2024. We put some postcards out around the front, and I'm happy to answer questions later, supporting the branding. And we've done some work with Neil in the past and the Glasgow Science Fiction Writers Circle, who are well represented here tonight. So that's wonderful. So let's move on to this. Neil lives in Glasgow, works as a technical writer, cabaret, band, dark heart, I think, based on the writing in here as well. Queen of Clouds is technically a prequel to The Moon King, which was shortlisted for the British Science Fiction Association and the British Fantasy Awards. You've been nominated for BSFA and British Fantasy Awards for New Scotus with the edited New Scotias. How do you pronounce that?
Nova Scotia.
Yeah, I can read. I've been up since 5, everybody. I'm not doing well today. Yeah. And that was also nominated for the World Fantasy Award. And Queen of Clouds is
what do we say about Queen of Clouds? It's very Mervyn Peaky.
Yeah.
It has a real Gormengastian vibe in there. And yeah, do you wanna take us away and bring us into it with the wee reading just now?
Do you know what's interesting? The James Lovegrove in the Financial Times reviewed The Moonkind, which was very grateful for that. He mentioned that was also very Mervyn Peaky, and I've never read Gormenghast. All right. Later, Billy pushed the teetering handcart down to the village of Sillop, where the doctor and her new wife, as consumed as they might otherwise have been with marital happiness, examined their purchases and missed none of the blemishes. They paid only 2/3 of their agreed price and tipped him a solitary kudo. Billy spent most of the money on the provisions that they needed to supplement the milk, eggs, and vegetables he and Kim provided for themselves. Sitting on a doorstep in the village square to eat his meagre hunk of bread and cheese, he tried not to think of the sheaf of credits that had been offered to him the previous day. His and Kim's life wasn't defined by achievement. They had enough to live on, the privacy to do as they pleased, and the joy that was the company of Sylvans. They needed nothing more. It was rare to see Sylvans in the villages, but there was one across the square right now, helping unload hay bales from a wagon. The jowly farmer, with a deal of shouting and exaggerated mime, was trying to show it where to put the bales. The Sylvan just got on with the job. Throughout this process, a small child with pigtails and a muddy face chattered happily to it. And when the farmer wasn't looking, the Sylvan did a comic dance for the girl, and she erupted into fits of giggles. Billy smiled to see that. When he got home, he toured the remaining groves. His route took him firstly up the mountain, then west across the slope, and finally down again, following the gully line that led back to the house. Mostly, things were in order. He pruned a little wire bush, made a note of cankers, and spotted the early signs of sponge bracket among the groves along the sheltered southwest ravine. Instead of heading straight back to the house, he decided to check the trees on the northern side of the road too. That slope was more exposed, and the master rarely planted there, though pines grew well enough. Fungus was little respecter of species, and Kim would want to know how far it had spread. Billy encountered the first sylvan grove barely 10 yards from the road, the second not long after that, and quickly counted a dozen collections of trees. When did they last checked over here? It couldn't have been that long, could it? He sighed inwardly at the thought of so many. A new sylvan was always a happy thing, but the old man was going to kill himself at this rate. There were no signs at least of fungal growth in the trees, but that seemed hardly relevant, next to the fact of their existence and the work they promised. The last clearing he stumbled upon was of an altogether different sort. This was an old grove, choked with thorny, honey-scented gorse and waist-high empty head, the hollowed seed cases talking together as the grass stems swayed like springs. But the overgrowth didn't completely hide the hunched outlines of the sylvans who had come here to die. The shapes crouched among the grasses, head bowed, could have been mistaken for rocks or logs, but if you looked closely, they were recognizable, despite how weathered the wood had become. The once smooth grain split by heat and the cold and the rain, while the face was obscured by fur of emerald moss, an eczema of grey lichen, a caul of spider web, or that rotted fingers had crumbled off, or that the clenched wood had become a nest for beetles. This grove was a private place. When Billy was young, the master had once discovered him in tears, trying to nurture the dead wood back to life, and explained that it was nature's way to take the wood back into the land, but Billy hadn't wanted to hear it. From then on, he had stayed clear of the old groves as much as he could, and he still did. Now he thought about chop again, the stiffness in the sylvan's joints, the condition of its wood. Back at the house, he smelled cooking as soon as he mounted the porch. The newest crafting must be done then. Master Kim emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron and carrying 2 large bowls of mutton stew. He tossed Billy a glare, but his voice was gentle. Wash your hands. The old man looked, well, old. His arms and shoulders under his oily, sawdust-sprayed vest were pale and slack where once they had been nut brown and tight as wire. Those shoulders trembled slightly as Kim returned to the kitchen for the greens. His hair, slicked into greasy tufts, resembled wild clouds more than ever. His eyes, roomy holes, in a face grizzled by salt and pepper stubble, made Billy think of knots in lichen-specked wood. Billy went into the kitchen to scrub the forest grime from his hands. You're working too hard. The master, returning for the bread, blinked at him. The wood is impatient, he said. Come and eat. Billy slipped into the chair that he'd sat in the first night he came to live with the old man and had used habitually ever since. The simple table had been old when he was first apprentice. The wood was smooth as marble, and Billy knew its faded grain as well as he knew the eating irons, the chipped plates, and his master's face. But there was something different tonight. At the centre of the table, in between the bread and the tureen of cabbage and peas, was an ugly vase. It was shaped like a lumpen onion and held briar blossoms. Billy stared at the vase, fascinated and embarrassed in equal measure by the unexpected reminder of his earliest attempts at craftsmanship. I thought that had been lost years ago. The master grunted. You wished. And he plugged a smile with a mouthful of bread and mutton. Yeah, perhaps I did. Billy was reminded again of the mess he'd made at the doctor's chairs. They ate in silence, enjoying the herb stew until their bowls were scraped clean. Billy cleared away the dishes, and when he returned, the master had produced 2 brown bottles of beer. So it's finished. Come and see. The master's workshop smelled of sweet oil and wood shavings. It had been swept clean and all the tools were back on their racks, allowing all of Billy's attention to fall upon the new creation. Every sylvan was as different to the next as people were. No 2 the same, not even Grove siblings. Where Chop had always been square-shouldered and thick in the thigh, and the one in the square earlier had been squat and trunkish, this new one was long-limbed and slender in a way that made Billy think of the village girls on laundry day. Its pose, seated on the floor, with its legs extended in front of it, and supported by the struts of its arms, its delicate articulated fingers splayed as if there were grass and daisies peeking up between them, reinforced this impression. Then again, the planes of the upper torso were sleek and angular, the head jutting like the proud lads who contested the athletic races at the fair. It's a beauty, this one, Billy said. The young woods that had grown together had been pressed into its construction. Ironwood for strength, willow for suppleness, birch for intelligence, beech for wisdom, ash for heart, had a greenish sheen of seasoning oil. The wire bush fibres that connected the joints glistened steel bright. The stones of the sylvan's eyes were milky opalines that conveyed a wistfulness for all its leisurely dynamism. Ask it then, Kim said. On that first day in the schoolyard, when the old carpenter had come offering work to the right lad or lass, he had held up a freshly cut elm branch and asked, "What would you do with this?" Make a chair, make a broom, make a pencil. Among all the stupid responses, Billy had been the only one to say, plant it. Kim had given the branch to him and told him to do that and to tend it and care for it, and however he saw fit. And when the old man had returned a month later, sure enough, there had been a new twig sporting 2 vivid leaves. And that had been that. Even though it had quickly become obvious that Billy lacked artistic talent, his affinity with the wood had been deemed useful. Quite how deep that affinity was, neither of them had known. It was 2 years before he admitted to the master that
while other people sometimes claim to get faint impressions of the Sylvan's intent, to him they had voices and names. The old man had looked at him strangely and then nodded and said, "You're like a Sylvan yourself growing up with them. The most resonate in the earth and the air, stands to reason that they should resonate in you too." Even as a boy, he paid little attention in school. Billy had known that motes were the inert particles left behind in the world after the turners had turned away. But he preferred to think of the Sylvans simply as a gift of nature. It made him feel less of a freak. The young Sylvan swiveled its head in their direction, like a coquette to whom Billy had only now become of interest. Billy cleared his throat. "Well, what do you call yourself then?" The voice came soft and sibilant, like the breeze in the barley. It seemed to come from a long way away, but the meaning was clear. To Billy's mind, it said, "Seldom." The head swiveled to Billy, from Billy to the old man, as if looking for confirmation. Then, with more confidence, it repeated itself. "Its name is Seldom," Billy said. The wooden creation drummed on the floorboards with its long fingers. "Seldom," it said again, this time more excitedly. There was not a chop's reserved grace here. Instead, there was an endearing, puppy-like urgency. The master shook his head. "If it says so," he said. The Sylvan got to its feet with a clatter of limbs, and the old man's eyes widened, having caught now a hint of its excitement. "Rest, rest," he told it. And then, as he locked the workshop and ushered Billy back towards the house, he said, "Didn't I say that wood was in a hurry?"
Wow. But also it's so evocative of that growth and nature and the natural world, which is such an interesting part as the book moves and kind of tensions therein. I mean, did you set out with it being kind of really nature versus, country versus city, or was it always just a flow through?
No, I don't think so. I think I set out with the idea of the city and realized you had to come from somewhere. There's an old cliche in fantasy writing that the young boy with a power of some description, or the young kid with a power of some description, who comes from humble rural beginnings and comes towards, venture towards the city and finds his destiny and all that sort of thing. This is not that book, but it has that shape. Basically, the countryside stuff came after I realised that it'd be a while until they got to you had to come from somewhere. But actually, you need to set that up. You need to set up what the world is like, where the Sylvans come from, and how they're integrated into society, and how they're just part of nature. And there's no question about their existence as what they are and where they come from and how they're made. They just are. So that's when I decided to get really into the description of. There's quite a lot more description of the woods and what Billy does in the woods and what his job actually is, husbanding these trees. Yeah.
When you say the sort of the kind of fantasy press with the young protagonist going to the city with it actually made me think more of the time mouse and the country mouse feeling. That kind of the tensions that he has of the excitement of movement versus the resentment that some of that comes up, and the uncomfortableness when eventually the event to leave comes in. I think with the Sylvans, it was really interesting to initially, when I first read it, the artist model dolls that you have that you draw around, had them all pictured exactly the same, when you first meet Chop, which is the first that you sort of see, and then hearing their differences in the personality of the voice, that really comes through, as you do with when you start to think about trees and wood and seeing, faces and doors and everything like that.
That's interesting, because it's interesting that you got that from it, because maquettes, those artist dolls are exactly what I was thinking of, precisely what I had in mind. So, it's, and then Reggie Oliver, who did the cover, has caught a little bit of that in the
the cover
as well.
is phenomenal, and it also gives you that real sense of travel. For any of you who haven't had a good look at it, obviously when you do buy it, you should. But there's phenomenal Sylvans at the side and kind of broken ones, and then the dirigible and the Queen of Clouds and the city off in the distance.
Ian Waits' description of his vision of it. Imagine if the story was in China plate, right? That's pretty much it.
No, that is really interesting. So it feels very fantasy.
Yeah.
But then it feels very science fiction at parts as well. So I mean, what do you how do you feel that you write with this? It's an intentional confusion. If you want to put it that way. There's that old, was it Clark, who said any sufficiently advanced form of technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I kind of wanted to explore. It's a similar approach to the Moon King, the first book. Nobody in the world knows if it's fantasy. Obviously, don't know it's fantasy because it's their world, but they build their science, they build their engineering on these things, whether they're technically feasible things, these motes, or not. They sound like they could be nanotech, discarded nanotech. They sound like they could be, it's almost like the equivalent of midichlorians, that kind of thing. I don't actually care. I think it's actually quite interesting just to say, here's a fantasy conceit for you. Imagine there's something in the world that allows the world to start becoming sentient. Imagine that's there, and then go from there. For me, it's not important that there's an explanation for it. Which is weird, because I kind of took it as, yes, of course, the world is sentient, there's energy and everything. This is, kind of going back to that. And it wasn't until the progression through, I was like, oh, maybe this is leftover technology from a before. There's a before from before, because obviously we have, knowing that this was a prequel to the Moon King, and knowing that that's in a sort of post end times book. It's like, this is the before times. But I think this before times had a previous end times, and that cyclical sense really comes through as well, I guess, with the
there's always a before time, isn't there?
Yeah.
And there's always a time that comes after. And when you're living in the time you live in now, nobody ever knows that much about. We don't know that much about the Dark Ages. We don't know anything about what's going to come in 500 years' time. So.
I think as well that you put this into one of two of the characters later on about resistance to change and necessity for change. So power is resistant to change, but for the survival of the city or the people within it, that it's so necessary to grow. And obviously we've got this image with the Sylvans and these groves of trees that they cannot come into being unless they grow.
Yeah.
And there's an urgency in that growth, that kind of coming moment together. And I did dots down about sentience and kind of the questions that you ask, that people ask, it can play chess better than the Turing test.
Yeah.
Turing chess. That all of these kind of questions that kind of go through asking, is it alive? Is it alive? About everything.
Yeah.
And the ethics then that comes in when we, is the weather alive? Are these Sylvan slaves? Are they chattel? Are they servants? Are they? How do you view that? Was that kind of a conscious drawing to the ethics of?
Yeah, there's a scene maybe a third of the way into the book Billy is forced against his will because he's got a good life. He quite enjoys himself. He doesn't really want to have to do anything else other than just hang about in the countryside and enjoy himself. Then he gets forced to go to this city, and he ends up going to a big fancy party. By which point, rumor of these things called siblings has got about, and they kind of go against one of the sort of standing rules of the city, of their whole community. At least if you've got a reason for interpreting the law that way, they do. And a lot of the story at that point is about how the people who have power in a community like that take something new and try and make an advantage of it. The entire society is a meritocracy. It's all about trying to take advantage and make advantage over everybody else. So everyone's always trying to get one over on everybody else and make it into some of them just want control of the thing, so they've got control of it. Nobody else has got control of it, even if they don't understand what it is. It's that kind of thing. So he goes to this party, and people are intentionally sort of coming up to him and saying, "So this thing is that do they kill people? Are they dangerous? Are they useful? Is it intelligent? Because computer intelligence is outlawed. What way can they make it take advantage of it? What way can we catch you out and take advantage of you? Because you've made these things."
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting part. The part I just was flicking to, because of that sort of the meritocracy, in the sense that really there should be an equal. There's a place in it called the Exchange, which is sort of the centre of that city's power structures, and in the very centre of that, or the oldest part, is the trades. Which really is like an honest trade, a day's labour, a day's work, and but it's kind of diminished now, because the trade itself is almost looked down on. It's how that trade is controlled. It's the above power, and kind of very close to that, I've got taxes, the 1% eat the rich, written down in my notes. And there was a very sort of strong sense of that parasitic that you get. People are always looking for the reflected merit, the reflected glory, or power as well, and that is literally the gateway to the city. Is being able to have enough.
Yeah, you've got to have enough about you to get in. You're not allowed in. I mean, which is a scam anyway.
Yeah.
Because people with the right connections can always come and go. They're restricting access to anyone they think isn't worthy of being. It's just top-down gatekeeping, essentially.
And right on the edge of that,
literally gatekeeping, right?
Literally gatekeeping, and sort of false papers and everything else. And we have the refugee camp.
Yeah.
That is there because unintentionally you wrote a climate change novel.
Unintentionally I wrote a climate change novel.
And it, I also think it's for anybody that's not in Glasgow, but you might hear this from people in there, feels like a very Glaswegian novel when it comes to the weather.
Again.
Very much so. I mean, some of the weather stuff, and it will come to later, but in terms of a climate change novel, it starts with Billy Braid reclined on the side porch waiting for the 5 o'clock rain. The rain was late again. So that kind of immediacy of something that, you can time the weather, which is, again, not something you can necessarily do in Scotland, but that nature is breaking down, or what you can set your clock by, or something has been perverted to set your clock by it, and you can no longer do this.
Yeah.
And this is causing drought.
Yeah.
Things have become relied on. And we have these refugees who are just kept out completely.
I think that wasn't a very late edition, but I realized I needed a counterpoint to to draw focus to how entitled the people were that live in the city. People that live in the city. Everywhere else gets sunshine, rain, a bit of everything. People that live in the city just get sunshine because the people who make the weather makers, make it so.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the things that has allowed them to rise to the top of the meritocracy. They're one of there's sort of new money,
Mm-hmm.
but they've risen to the top because of control the weather, and assure everyone of a sunny day every day. So I realized I needed something else that was an ongoing story, and to show the callousness and to give people who weren't quite so callous and quite so self-centered just something to talk about. Say, look, there's these refugees outside. Over there, there's drought because they don't get rain anymore, even though they pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we don't let them in. So it gives you that idea of a city where there are good-headed people and bad-headed people at loggerheads.
And even, and Billy, where he's from, out in the mountain area, they get second-hand weather.
Yeah.
They get the cast off of it. So there's also that sort of resistance as well to kind of what's new and fashionable and controlled and owned by the city, that trickle-down economy almost.
Yeah.
How resented that is as well. It's not even just natural. They have to get it second-hand from the city itself. Let's talk about the weather makers then, for that is indeed the title, with the Queen of Clouds, head of the Weathermaker clan. Do you want to, I love everything about the weather in this book. You have petulant rain, you get mugged by the wind, you have, standing arguments for the rain, which to be fair, or the weather in general, which to be fair, I think most of us probably have at some point just looked up and went, don't you dare straighten my hair. But or not. But talk to us about the clouds.
Right. So I'm going to give you a spoiler for the end of the book, and that is the clouds win to a degree. And the reason that's a spoiler, I have to, if you've read The Moon King, you'll know the Moon King takes place in a world that is flooded, and it's flooded with mostly water, but also a lot of weirdness and stuff that feels like magic, but may not be magic. And I don't even know which it is. So when I decided I was going to write the story of Queen of Clouds, the story was always going to be, how did the world get flooded? And that's what I started with. And I quickly got on from there to, well, what if the weather was sent in and this was just out of control and no one would control it? No one could control it, was what I was about to say, but actually no one would control it is actually the heart of the book. It's actually, so it becomes, when you realise that's what the story is going to be about, and the clouds, essentially it's mostly about rain, but there are other weather phenomena in it later on in the book as well. It gets a little bit more violent and a little bit more deadly as well.
So just like Glasgow.
Just like Glasgow. As soon as you think the rain's over, here comes the choking mists. Spoiler. I said, well, what kind of sentience would weather have? And I had a couple of different ideas, but the one I'd settled on was, well, if it's a new phenomenon, it's going to be quite young. And the Sylvans, their intelligence, their sentience is quite a mature sentience. It's like old as the woods, if you like. Their trees grow for years before they get chopped down and made into Sylvans. The weather kind of grows like that. So I thought to myself, why not give it the personality characteristics of a 2-year-old child, like a really bratty 2-year-old child. And that's essentially how it plays out. It's like a lot of the time it's like trying to bargain with a toddler who really wants its own way. And isn't happy with a lot in life at this moment.
A toddler that also has a sense of rights.
Oh yeah, very entitled toddler. Yeah.
Yeah, but not necessarily wrong. There's a brilliant sort of scene. So Billy can, as with Sylvans, he can hear the weather and talks back to it, gets a bit of a shock, doesn't think that anybody understands it's ranting and raving and raining.
Yeah.
But there's a part where he engages with a sort of kind of reasoning with it.
Yeah.
And the Queen of Clouds just destroys it. You know, why? And there was a kind of quick question of, well, it works for us.
You mean the scene in the ballroom?
Yeah, I do. Clouds of wine, everybody, clouds of wine. How many of us have dreamed of that?
Fancy party.
Very fancy party. But there's a kind of, it works for us, therefore it has no rights. It's ours to dispose of, which I think is a big theme in the book itself, for the planet, for people, for poverty. Were you consciously layering it that much, or
no? I think
we did really well with it.
I think a lot of that was just on my mind while I was writing it. Same with the accidental climate fiction thing. You know, a lot of, when you start thinking about what happens when people are bargaining with the weather, or what happens with so it's essentially from Billy's point of view, he's the guy who says this weather has to be stopped. We have to do something about it. You can't just let it do its thing, right? And first of all, they don't believe him, and then he manages to convince them that there's a problem, and they go their own way about various different people have different ideas about it, how to fix the problem, and they all go their own way about it. And he's left running from pillar to post, going, somebody just do something, you know. So essentially, what the climate fiction part of the book is about frustration of being the sort of person that a lot of us are, who recycles and composts and is looking into diminishing the amount of plastic they use, and making different choices in terms of detergents and all those kind of things. The things that we can do, but the things we can't do are, as we know, COP26 down the road last year, and the things we can't do are convince our government to actually do the things that they need to do, convince all the governments to do the things that they need to do to make the difference in the rate of change of the heat of the planet, something that's going to be effective and useful for a continued existence, kind of thing. So it's a lot of it is about that sense of frustration. Billy feels that sense of frustration in trying to do his small thing that will save that world in the same way. I think a lot of us have been getting increasingly frustrated about the things that we can and can't do, you know, to make the same kind of changes in our world.
I think as well there's that tension between individualism and collective action that you have. You know, there's a point of resistance where Paraphernalia Loss, who's the what would you call it, Princess of Clouds, I guess.
She is the Princess of Clouds.
The Princess of Clouds.
Self-styled.
Says, you know, well, what can I do on one person? And it's one person, two hands statement. So that doesn't work alone, as you see with his frustrations, but there is that question of what can we do collectively as points of resistance or points of change. But you have to own that out in the open. You can't, you know, keep going about it in the dark. Sort of in the counter movement has to be clearly challenging, not subterfuge.
No, absolutely. And there are a number of instances where collectives are described, and some of them are more isolated and less seen than others. And you get, I think one of them particularly I'm thinking about, which I'm not going to talk about any more than this, is sort of underlines that feeling, and that feeling that you can't really do anything useful away from out of the limelight. You kind of have to stick your head above the parapet as a collective, and eventually there's a collective movement in the book, and things start to happen.
No, they do. I think that sort of ties into another part that really made me interested was about free will, which I think is a really strong part throughout as well. Constant your individual choice and what you are operating under. What are your various ties or shackles, but also what are you being compelled to do.
Yeah.
There is. It's on the back. So I'm not kind of this in the spoiler. There is powerful ink, and when I first started reading this, I thought, what would I get put into ink if this ink could do anything to somebody that read it? I was like, would you make a love? People fall in love when you read the love poems, or they feel the emotions of writing or whatever. And you, of course, took it dark, and it's a compellant.
Yeah.
It's a mind control. It's the power of the press, and who has the right to that. So,
and there's different levels of it as well. And the press, the people that own the inksmiths, who also own the paper, because that's the way it is with monopolies, isn't it? They use the least level they can get away with, but sometimes they're forced to go hard. And there's I guess commentary on the power of the media and the power of the press in that as well, because
kind of almost right from the start, there's a kind of compellant to that. That's part of Billy's action into the city.
Yeah.
But and he has a level of his own rights taken away in that movement. And you kind of wonder about, would he have made the choices he made if he not resented having had that been trusted with those choices? He wasn't trusted with them. He resented them. He rebelled against them.
Yeah.
Things don't go well. So I think that is an interesting part, but there's definitely sort of, as you say, there's scales, there's kind of the gentle nudging influence, the influencer parts, and then there's the kind of enshackled part with the institutes and corrections and kind of hard time under.
Yeah. I mean, there are several serious puns, not fun puns, serious puns in the book. One of them is that when you go to jail, you go to this place called the Institute of Improvement, and when you go to jail, you get a thing called your sentence, and you read your sentence. Your sentence is written in obescent ink, and it makes you just stay in jail for the length of time that you're supposed to stay there. That's what it does. That's your sentence. Thanks very much for staying in jail. See you when you get out.
It's like a monopoly board, but
Yep.
there is absolutely no get out of jail free
Yeah.
card. Except when you get out of jail free-ish, you get a sentence revoker effectively.
Yeah.
But there's an interesting part about sort of that the level of that, the kind of the real institutionalization. And I thought it was a really interesting commentary on justice systems. And the kind of made me think, I imagine we're not any better in the UK, but the US federal system of sort of
The penal system.
mandatory minimums and everything else, but that kind of servitude, the sort of free labor and the corruptions therein. Like, if you can undercut people who would happily work by forcing people you have put in prisons to work against their will because you've literally taken it out, the poverty levels that build up, and then you feed more presence. It was a really painful read. Very well done.
There are aspects of the penal system in this that are very much a painful read. I always think with these things, you just got to go hard or go home with them. There's no point soft sloping or going, and half-hearted. So.
But do warn you, if anybody hands you a piece of paper, you do tend to be like, I'm going to look at that askance. First of all, direct read, and you could be under a spell.
Or wear the special glasses.
Yes.
All the posh people with special glasses.
Yeah, and I guess that's it as well. It's those lenses that you can drop down and they will protect you from it. And again, sort of put in there. I am just trying to keep an eye on the time. I was going to say, should we move to some questions from folks?
Before we do that, I want to say something else about the end. Because we've quite a serious discussion so far. A humorous story. A friend of mine, Robin Duncan, who's one of the writers circle, he's on holiday at the moment, and he took a copy down with him, and they wrote the journey halfway down, and he left the book in the hotel room. And so he's ordered another one that's waiting for him when he gets home. He's very annoyed. He was kind of enjoying it. But I did point out there is a bit about halfway through the book where it's written in certain ink that makes you forget where you put the book. So you will have to go buy another copy. Some of you will fall for that.
That's so bad. Just like there. Questions? Does anybody? Hi there.
Yes, about the ink. Is there anything, because I haven't read it yet, is there anything in there about people making themselves deliberately ignorant and not reading things as a result of knowing you could do something to them?
I'm just going to repeat that back to is there anything about choosing not to read so that they can't be exposed to the ink and the powers therein?
Not intentionally doing it, and partly that's because the populace at large don't really know about it, don't really know the extent to which it's used. Your school books, for instance, are written in an ink that's called Noteworth, and that's publicly known about. Noteworth, pay attention to your lessons, right? The more serious inks, pretty much black ops that nobody really has a clue about. So, not really, but there are a bunch of characters who So this meritocracy, this city, it's a hill, right? There's a high town and the low town, and the rich people live in the high town. So ones that live right down in the slums in the low town can't read and write anyway. So they actually have a part to play, because of that.
Then you also have the danger of when you educate yourself, you become exposed to.
That does happen.
Yeah, you're not getting away with that still. I'm still smarting over that bit. Any other questions?
Can I ask you, what was your inspiration for Sisters?
Oh, Michelle.
I asked because when I was reading the book and I was reading their bits and the stories, and all it kept popping into my head was Shakespeare's Sister, and that running song that came out in the 80s or 90s, and it just went on and on and on in the charts, and every time I read their sentence, that's all I could think about.
So there are two characters in the book called the Sisters. One is Sister Skin and one is Sister Sin. And we were just being asked by somebody sporting a rather fabulous Glasgow in 2024 t-shirt. What was the inspiration for them?
I don't know. I honestly can't tell you now. But what I do know is that they were one of the first parts of the book. They were very much in the first draft. If anyone was at the EasterCon in Manchester in 2016, it was 2016. I actually read about it. It was just about, the first draft was about finished then. And I read that bit from it at that EasterCon. So I no longer remember. I'm sorry, Michelle. I really like them though.
Well, I absolutely adore them. There's like cats, so you can't go wrong with that.
Yeah.
There's also, there's like the inscriber and the eraser part of both of their characters as well, which is, give me the very Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind set moment, as well as kind of like injection the Matrix, kind of plug it in.
Mm-hmm.
You know the thing, you can do the thing feeling as well. Which I'm trying to say without giving spoilers, but there are very strong senses from each of these characters.
The thing about Sister Skin and Sister Sin is Sister Skin can change your body and Sister Sin can change your mind. That's what effectively they're. But they're also types of anarchist kind of dark heart of the city that only certain people know about, and it's a big secret. You're not supposed to have been to them, but loads of people do.
Yeah, the open secret.
The open secret,
Yeah.
Hi. So I have read the novel, and I had a question about the characters inside, because I know you tweeted out earlier today about picking the readings for tonight. And Billy faces up against very willful set of characters who all have very strong motivations, very strong ideas about what they're entitled to. So as essentially a character wrangler, were there any characters that were particularly difficult to kind of work with in this plot?
So Ruth was asking, were there any characters who knew their own mind and were difficult to wrangle, as there's quite a sort of strong-willed personas throughout?
Yes. Yeah, there were two. One was Moraine Otterbury, who's the leader of the Inksmiths, who consistently didn't want to be as dastardly as I wanted her to be, but found better ways of being dastardly, if that makes sense. And the other was Killick Roach, who's also quite dastardly. He starts off as he is a bit, yeah. No, I can't tell you that.
No, spoilers.
No spoilers. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, he eventually found his way into the story in a way that suited the story. Let's put it that way. Thank you for that question. That was an interesting one. Any more questions? Sure.
With all the themes of people controlling each other and symbolism of the ink, do you ever feel like sort of evil overlord that's in control of everything?
I don't feel like it's in control of anything.
Does Neil feel like the evil overlord in control of everything through the power of ink?
No, I didn't feel it was in control of anything. It was actually a really difficult book to plot. And I did, I drafted a half until I got into a place where I thought it was kind of working. And then Al read it, Hal Duncan, who's sitting in front. People on YouTube can't see him, but he's there. Read it for me, and we went to the pub for 2 sessions, 3 sessions. Several long sessions where a lot of Guinness was consumed. And it all magically got into the right shape somehow. So it needed that extra, and being part of a writer's group like we are, it needed that extra exterior view to be able to help put the bits in the right place dramatically. And we actually came up with a little more for some of the other characters to do that weren't as prominent in the book in the first draft. So Vernon and Climby, the two children, have more to do in the middle of the book that wasn't there originally.
They're great characters, absolutely brilliant.
Cockney urchins. But yeah.
They're the real heart as well. They've got, so well done on that edition.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, Vern was kind of really quite in the side. Yeah, Guinness. I think I think I was just drinking something else, but I don't think it's.
The next question is Callum.
Oh,
Yeah, you were talking about like magic and science and like writing magic as science and writing science as magic.
Yeah.
And I was kind of thinking as you're reading that opening section, there's a kind of interface there with craft. There's a kind of common theme. That's kind of a theme that runs through your fiction, maybe arguably from short stories like The Gubbins.
oh, yeah.
I just thought maybe you might want to talk about that kind of aspect.
So Hal's basically asking about fiction and craft and crafting the craft throughout.
Yeah, if ever you want someone to sum up exactly what it is you've been thinking for 25 years, ask Al. Use your math. Yeah, I think that's very true. I'm on a few panels over the weekend at QuaranCon, which is an online science fiction convention, and one of the panels on Monday evening is called "What Can Science Fiction Get Away With? Fantasy Can't?" To which my answer is nothing. I mean, we will talk about our science fiction. We will talk about rules of fantasy, and we'll go into some more detail of different kinds of subgenres and things like that, and how they work. But for me personally, I like that idea. I like the idea of craft. I like the idea of there being the same energy that goes into creating a magical artifact as there is engineering one, like a watch, building a watch from scratch, all the little bits, that's magic.
Yeah.
Even when it's not magic. So I think that's bang on, yeah. I'm going to use that from now.
There's also a lot of that in the seedlings yourself, when it's a process for your own work.
Yeah.
Letting it grow, slow mature, is it ready, got the speed, hurrying it up, teasing the sense of it out, what you thought the shape was going to be, and you still don't know the energy till it tells you.
Yeah, that's bang on, yeah. I mean, one of the things about the way the Society of Carpentry, which is the name of the city, is at the time of the book, is that previously things made by hand, artisanship, craftsmanship, were the things that were highest thought of. And then after that, it's been overtaken by manufacturing and commerce and the things that you look on there. Yeah, we think artisanship is very good, but not as good as what we do. We can make things in vast quantities now that we couldn't do before. So artisanship is it? And when you go to see the seat of the artisans, their hall, it's a kind of really kind of based out in the Alhambra in Granada. It's had that kind of, if you ever go there, it's got this beautiful sense of every single piece was handcrafted, and it's kind of a wonderful sense of accomplishment just in everything that's around you. So I wanted to create that sort of thing for the people who felt themselves to be sidelined in society, and they do. They've got an enormous chip on their shoulder about it, quite rightly so, in my opinion, even if they're not nice people.
Fair. Any other questions from anyone? Eileen.
So the mix of science and technology and the kind of general Gorman ghastliness of it all, where does that come from? You say that you haven't read Mervyn Peake, and I'm pretty sure that it reminds me very much of Moorcock, but I don't think you read much of that either. Is it like Mike Harrison and people like that?
There's do you want to repeat that?
So if you haven't read Peake or Moorcock, but that sense is in there, where is this sort of sets of feelings come from, or where does it resonate with?
Again, I honestly don't think I can unpick that. It might come from Periconium, which was John Harrison's kind of fantasy masterwork. People haven't read that. And I'm a huge John Harrison fan. I have seen the Jonathan Rhys-Meyer BBC TV series of Gorman Gas, but I don't think that really counts, does it? In terms of its scale.
It has a sense of the feeling about it.
It was nicely cast. Let's put it that way.
Very original.
Yeah. I don't know, Elaine, I'm sorry. I'll sit down and think about that for the next time I get that question. I wish I did know. Like a lot, I've been doing this long enough that eventually a lot of the influences just become a mushy thing.
I guess though one of the parts is to also plug QuaranCon, which is a free online convention starting today and running over the weekend. We also have a panel with that on Monday night, which we strongly recommend. But Neil's on another panel about location as character.
Yeah.
And in Gormenghast, well, which is Titus grown Gormenghast, Titus alone.
Yeah.
Checks with the Greek scholar in the room. Hi, Rob. But the Gormenghast, the location is such a character in it, and I think maybe that's more than what Peak is doing itself. That sense is maybe the feeling of it as well as the art and everything else. So, what about location as character for you? Because that happened in the Moon King.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of it. I really am. So the substance of this panel is that we talk about that feeling you get when you read a book, that being in the city or on the planet or in the house or whatever the location or the spaceship or the location happens to be, it is as much an engagement, a personal engagement, as being with the characters is. A good example is, I guess, Gormenghast, people tell me. A more recent example is Susanna Clarke's Piranesi, if you've read that.
Yeah.
Or Jenny Fagan's Luckenbooth is another good example. Both terrific novels, recent novels. So yeah, I really like the idea of building a place that you have enough engagement with when you're reading the book or enjoying the story, that when you leave it, you're either very sad to leave or really relieved to leave.
Love the both in this.
Yeah, a little bit of both. I think that's possibly true, yeah. Yeah, me too.
So what time are we due to finish up?
Yeah.
Do you want to do it?
I can do a quick 5 minute.
We'll just have 5 minutes because I think you need to experience a little bit of the weather.
Okay. Be careful this one for reading around spoilers.
Sorry, I will have finished it by the end. It's fine.
Okay. Para returned her attention to flying the craft. It was getting cold, and the dirigible had now risen so high above the sea that the water looked as flat and hard as iron. So this classifies as dangerous work, does it? Billy asked. Just don't start jumping around and you'll be fine. She nodded her head, and Billy saw that they had ventured beyond the city's clear sky zone and were heading directly towards a churning bank of clouds. This is where we make the weather. Billy stayed silent as the dirigible climbed towards the thunderheads. There were winds up here that seemed to delight in tugging and buffeting the balloon. The motion upset the oranges in his stomach, and he reached for the rolled canework again. The light shifted, now silver dark and unsettling. Billy began to shiver, his skin simultaneously slick with moisture and tingling with electricity. But worst of all was the noise in his mind. He heard it in a similar way to Sylvan's speech, except there were no impressions that formed into words, just sounds and emotions. Beneath the bellowing winds and thunderous discharges was what could only be described as wailing. Not just one voice, but many, loud and petty and dissatisfied. The noise was becoming unbearable. Para eased back on the throttle, locking the rudder out so that the dirigible began to describe a wide circle that passed through the misty lower reaches of the clouds. Glancing at Billy, she observed his distress and offered him another nod of reassurance as she opened one of the wooden cases. It contained a selection of glassware. She mixed 2 liquids together in a flask and then screwed on a cap, like that of a perfume bottle, and pumped the mixture into the clouds in a fine green spray. Immediately it began to rain, and as drops splashed her face and flattened her hair, she collected some of the precipitation in a tube. She corked it, scrawled something on the label, and placed it in her case. She did this 5 or 6 more times on their slow circuit of the clouds, but Billy was only peripherally aware of her industry. As they circled, the winds became fierce. The voices got louder, brasher, more needy. Shaking, he clapped his hands over his ears, but it made no difference. There was no escape. Para's next task involved a long metal rod. He thought he heard her say, "So this is the dangerous bit?" And she held it by a rubber handle and pointed it out towards the clouds. Just a tickle and no more. But it was impossible to be sure over the racket going on in his head. Sizzling white whip cracked from the end of the rod. The effect was instantaneous. Lightning discharged in chain reactions throughout the cloud mass, and the tone of the voices changed to one of outrage. "Shut up." He couldn't hear his own voice over theirs. "Just shut up." And for a shocking moment, they did. The lightning ceased, the thundery grumble stilled. Only the sound of the dirigible's motor and the creaking of the basket intruded on the questioning silence which stretched on, as if the owners of the voices themselves were astonished to have been spoken to. Para's eyes were wide. I think, Billy's voice came out hoarse, the longer the silence stretched, the more uneasy he got about what would replace it. I think we should consider getting back. Para was already nosing the dirigible down, away from the clouds. Quickly, the howls resumed as a gust of wind slewed across them, battering the balloon with stone-sharp hail, and there was a palpable build-up of energy behind it that frizzled in Billy's hair, tingled his skin, filled his nose with the smell of ionized air. Without needing to ask, Billy knew they were both remembering what had happened before. Para's expression was deadly earnest, and she throttled the engine for all it was worth. But there was nothing she could have done to escape the skull-shaking boom and blinding bolt that barreled Billy off his feet. His vision blurred and his ears rang. He smelled smoke. His only thought was relief that he could still feel the floor underneath him. And he waited for the next blow to come. But the voices resolved into one voice. Don't move. Stay where you are. The even purr of the engine, the creak of the canework. Billy opened his eyes. He was on the opposite side of the basket from Para, and between them there was a large ring of charred wicker and a clear view of the sea. "You're right." She was ashen, but nodded. "And the balloon?" Her laugh was shaking. Sky knows how. Billy thought that the sky very likely did, but he didn't say so. The people of Carpentine had been pretty damning when they discovered that Sylvans were conscious. He didn't want to call it blame when they discovered that the weather was, too.
So if it turns out you think that the weather has a shit list, it might just do, and you might be on it. Thank you so much, Neil, for a wonderful book, a wonderful conversation. Thank everybody for coming and for Waterstones for hosting us here tonight. And we'd like to thank you at home for joining us as well on our hybrid on a shoestring. Glasgow in 2024 is the Worldcon bid to host World Science Fiction Convention in Glasgow in August 2024. We really hope that you will join us there. We hope that you will support us. Go and check out the webpage, and we'll see you again soon. Have a great night.
So if I could just ask you all to remain seated while we get Neil out to his signing